Hello, good morning, everyone. We'll wait for a couple of minutes until more people join us. Thank you.
Hi, Shayu.
Hello, Dushan. A very good morning.
Morning.
We'll wait for more people to join.
Yeah,
Um,
Ankur should also be joining in, right?
Meanwhile, I have added the link to our Elevate Finance community. It's in the chat box. Here you will find all the updates on GST and all that's happening at CashFlo, including our webinar, our events, and much more. Okay, I think it's 11:05. Let's begin with the webinar. Dushan, are you here? पटकन मागून घे.
Hey, yeah, Shayu. Sorry. Should we start?
Yeah. So now to kickstart our webinar, I would like to introduce our today's speaker, Dushyant Agarwal, co-founder and director at CashFlo. Dushyant co-founded CashFlo to unlock the financial potential of Indian businesses with expertise in digital transformation and strategic partnerships. He has been pivotal in building CashFlow's finance automation and working capital solution. An IIT Delhi and IIM Calcutta alumnus, Dushyant brings 13 plus years of experience and spanning roles at Arvind Limited, BCG's, Barclays Capital, and JP Morgan. With this, I would ask Dushan to begin with our today's session.
Thanks so much, Shayu. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for taking your time to join us today. The agenda of the session today essentially was to help everyone understand a little bit more about the TReDS program that the government had launched. It was originally launched back in 2017, so it's been around for some time. But recently, the government has essentially increased the gamut of the program's coverage, right? So till now, TReDS was basically supposed to be for buyers which have a turnover of more than 500 crores, right? But recently there was a notification where this turnover range has been lowered to 250 crores, right? So essentially now companies which are between the turnover of 250 to 500 crores can also take advantage of TReDS for their own purchase financing. And what does it mean for you? What does it mean, for your suppliers, right? We wanted to essentially do a quick session to help people understand. I'm sure there are a lot of questions around it. So we wanted to share, information and perspective from our side on that, right? So that's a quick agenda. We've created a few pages just to, help anchor the conversation. Let me quickly bring up my screen and we can get started on that. Perfect. I hope my screen is through. Shadu, can you confirm?
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. And it's in presentation mode, right?
Yep.
All right, great. I think Shadu mentioned a quick sort of background about me and the company, but just to, I think, again, give a quick background to everyone. While as CashFlo, we started in 2017, but at a group level, we've actually been operating in financial services for more than 25 years now. We've been helping companies raise equity capital, debt capital, right, across different modes and modes of funding. As CashFlo itself, currently honored to be working with about 1,200 plus enterprise companies in India and about 3 lakh SMEs, on our platform and helping them in their working capital and their payable automation, journey. We've also been fortunate, to have raised about $11 million in venture capital, primarily backed by two main investors, Elevation Capital and General Catalyst. Both of them are fairly renowned investors, having backed several large companies such as Paytm, Make My Trip, Airbnb, Stripe, right, so on and so forth. On TReDS, again, just to give everyone a quick background, like I was mentioning, TReDS, the full form of TReDS is Trade Receivable Discounting System, right? The short form is TReDS, TReDS. This was launched in 2017 as a special initiative by the government to basically help MSME companies in their working capital, right? And to create an ecosystem of financing specifically for MSMEs, which are supplying to large corporates, right? How can they get invoice financing, sales invoice financing, easily, right, through a network or through a platform, so that their own business can grow multifold, right? The idea here was that it's a single platform on which, I think today more than 100 banks are live, right? So essentially, instead of the buyer and the supplier having to go to individual banks and trying to set up a limit, trying to get financing from them, the advantage of TReDS is that you can get all these banks on a single platform, right? And they can just set up limits on you, and you can easily avail financing from there. And it's a completely unsecured financing. There is no collateral required. The financing happens against the invoice. It should be a verified invoice. So basically, the buyer needs to verify the invoice on the platform and agree that yes, this is a genuine document, and that's the collateral, so as to say, for the financing to take place, right? Essentially, what's the benefit, right, for buyers and suppliers? Because any ecosystem or any platform to work, it's very important that all the parties, and not just buyers and suppliers, but even the financiers, what are they gaining by, like registering themselves on a TReDS platform, right? So I think the advantage of TReDS platform for from a buyer standpoint, basically was more around creating an ecosystem where your vendors, because now they are getting access to this quick funding, it can help you improve your supply chain health. It can help you improve your payment terms with them. It can help you as buyers improve your working capital cycle as well, right? If I talk about it from a supplier standpoint, essentially the suppliers also, they can now easily get payments through this platform. They don't have to follow up, for their payments anyway. They can get like without any documentation, without any collateral, right? They can get financing, right? And they don't need to go to multiple banks and multiple players to get their funding, right? So basically for suppliers, a single tap to get money quickly. From a buyer standpoint, a way to like strengthen their supply chain, strengthen their terms with their vendors, right? Improve their own DPO, right? And from the financial standpoint, right, the idea is that they are now getting access to a high quality trade very easily on a platform, right? A verified trade on a platform against which they can do their financing. So it's lower risk for them as well, right? So that's how the TReDS platform is trying to create a win-win ecosystem between buyers, suppliers, and financiers, right? This is again what I was alluding a little bit at the start of this webinar. Basically, the threshold for onboarding onto a TReDS platform as a buyer up till very recently was about 500 crores. But recently, the government has modified it and made that, revised that downwards to 250 crores, right? And there's a clear deadline that has also been set for onboarding. So by 31st March of 2025, all the companies which have more, a turnover of more than 250 crore need to register themselves on, one of the TReDS platforms, right? And there are 2 or 3 TReDS platforms currently out there, backed by different banks, different institutions, and the each of the business has to register themselves on one of these platforms by this date. Right. Now, what essentially we wanted to talk about is how do you make, like how do you use TReDS, right? There are 2 parts to TReDS. One is just registering yourself, which, I mean, for compliance sake, you could just do the paperwork and get yourself registered on a TReDS platform, which, by the way, as CashFlo, we'll be very happy to, do that, for anyone who needs that help. But I think we want to essentially take this one level beyond, right? There is no fun in just getting registered on a platform and not using it, right? So how do you actually use the platform to, create a win-win ecosystem for yourself, and your supplier is essentially what CashFlo, as CashFlo, we are trying to, help all our partner companies with, right? So typically how companies use TReDS today, right, and how it gets utilized, or one of the ways in which traditionally TReDS has been utilized, is that you make payment to your vendor on 45th day, which is, let's say, the typical credit period that you will have with the vendor. You can get extension on TReDS up to 180 days, at 8 to 9% per annum kind of an interest rate, right? And like that's a great rate, attractive rate, but essentially this cost for the extended credit period is getting borne by the buyer, right? Versus what we are able to do as CashFlo, is enable a much better ecosystem for both the buyers and the suppliers. We are able to enable an ecosystem where your vendor doesn't have to wait for 45 days. They can actually get paid on day one itself. On the other hand, you get an extension up to 180 days, like you would. And furthermore, you can actually get a subvention on this interest rate, right, or a cashback of 2% per annum, right? So if you compare the left hand side of the screen with the right hand side of the screen, the right hand side of the screen is a far more compelling value proposition for your supplier because they are getting money early. It's a far more compelling value proposition for you as a buyer because now you can actually get an extension up to 180 days at an even better cost, right, than what you're getting typically, right? So the cost of capital is lowered for you. Your vendor is getting money early, right? Becomes a win-win ecosystem for both you and your supplier, right?
Dushyant, I'm so sorry to stop you in between, but
Yeah.
there's some sort of block appearing on your PPT. Can you please check?
Okay. My slide is not visible.
The slide is visible, but there are some sort of shapes, like squares and rectangles appearing on the presentation on the towards the right of your presentation.
Oh, okay. Is it even appearing now?
Yeah, it's still there.
Okay. Let me move to the next slide and please let me know if it's visible here also.
It's visible, but it's a bit smaller, so I think but the texture and everything is readable, so I think we can make do with this.
Sure, what's happening?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think moving on, essentially how cash flow, right, helps companies. This is a simple schematic that can help you understand, right? Cash flow is uh, think of us as a marketplace again, where we help connect financiers, buyers, and suppliers on a single platform. But on our platform, the sources of capital are not just NBFCs or banks. It can be the TReDS platforms themselves. It can even be your own treasury funds, which are available, right? So what we help unlocking is much more sources of funds on the platform, right? And creating a more, I would say a wider ecosystem between you and your suppliers, right? One another interesting thing that we also do as cash flow is essentially, it's not just a platform actually, right? It's not just a product or just a marketplace where anyone can come in and log in. In B2B and in India, I think there's a lot of execution and operation support that is needed in making anything a success, right? It's a new concept. Everyone is unaware about it. What is the best way to run it? So Cashflow has a dedicated team that works with its buyer partners, with its supplier partners, with its financier partners, to basically handhold them on every step of the way, to help them understand, get them comfortable with the system, get them to utilize the system in the most efficient way, so that essentially, the final unlock or the value unlock, that we are looking to drive, that actually comes about, right? Essentially what we do here is, from a supplier standpoint, we are able to provide them a very quick self-serve portal, for the vendors. The vendors essentially can come onto this platform, have a very quick view on what are all the invoices that their buyers have approved, right? That means they have gone through the quality check process, they have gone through all other due diligences from a buyer standpoint, and hence they are, now due for payment. And any such invoice is quickly visible to the vendor on the platform, and now the vendor has the power to select what invoices they want to get discounted on the platform, right? The vendor has the power to essentially decide that on any day, whether it is day 1, day 2, day 10, day 50, right, whatever that day might be, they can essentially, um, come in and request for this quick payment. As well as it also serves as a portal where, they can easily track all their historical transactions, right? So think of it as a one-stop shop for you to have a sneak peek into your ledger maintained with your buyer, right? Generally, as a vendor, obviously they will have a ledger that they will maintain in their own accounting books, but a lot of time that ledger may not necessarily tally with the ledger which is maintained with the buyer, right? So we are creating this visibility for the suppliers so that they know exactly what their buyer's ledger looks like, and if there is a mismatch, they can resolve their query, right, much faster, rather than, that like waiting and then getting resolved, typically at the end of the year, right? um all right, I think that's, that was just more on the concept. I think we covered a bit of this earlier as well. Cashflow, is honored to be one of the largest platforms enabling early capital, early pay access to vendors. We handle more than 2 lakh crores of invoices annually on the platform. We work with more than 1,200 enterprises in the country. We have an SME network of more than 3 lakh SMEs on our platform, and some of the select companies, that we work with, right? All the leaders essentially across different industries, You look at Apar, Lupin, Samsonite, Zydus, Thermax. We work with several of these large companies. Perfect. I think that's what we had on agenda. Very short and sweet. So just to recap for everyone, TReDS mandate has now been lowered to 250 crores of turnover. Any company which has a turnover between 250 to 500 crores now needs to register on TReDS by March of 31st, 2025. Please remember that date. Um, uh, if you want to make use of TReDS, if you need CashFlo's help, we'll be very happy to help you get registered on the TReDS platforms. We will be very happy to enable an ecosystem for you where you can actually get, almost think of it as, zero cost credit period extension, right? We've helped companies increase their credit periods with their vendors, without any cost, right? For up to 30 days. And at the same time, the vendors can get access to payment on day one itself, right? So we've helped companies create that win-win ecosystem. If you think that's of interest, if that's something that you would want to deploy in your supply chain, we'll be happy to talk more on that in a one-to-one setting, right, and take you through how we've delivered this success for some of our other customers. Right. I'll open it up for questions. I think we already have a few questions coming in. Let me, Shri, should I take from the chat box, or how do you want to run that?
Yeah, I'll read it out to you if you want, and then we can. Meanwhile, anybody who has any more questions, please add it in the Q&A section or the chat box, and we'll take it up. So the first one we have in our Q&A boxes, if a banker sanctioned limit based on our financials.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, the question is, will the bank sanction the limit based on the financials? Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So essentially, the bank here is taking a risk on the buyer, right, on the platform. So they are looking at the buyer's financial strength to assign a limit, for this program. This limit is called as an unadvised limit, right? So they don't issue a sanction letter to you per se, right? Typically, when a limit gets sanctioned, you will receive a sanction letter from the bank. But when you are part of the TReDS ecosystem, you don't receive any sanction letter. But yes, from a bank's internal risk perspective, they will assign a number and say, okay, for buyer A, I am willing to fund up to, let's say, 10 crore worth of invoices, right? Or 20 crore worth of invoices. And what we have seen happen is that typically banks like to start with a slightly lower number. Once they have seen a few cycles of repayments happen on the platform, right, is when their comfort increases and they gradually increase their limits, on the platform.
Okay, so the next question we have is from Shailesh. Who bears the interest element?
Right. So this basically depends on, when the payment is happening, right? If, let's say, the original payment was supposed to happen on day 45, right, as per the terms between the buyer and the seller, and the seller is receiving money on day 45 from the TReDS platform, then the interest is, beyond that is borne by the buyer, right? But if, let's say, you are opting for getting money early, right, let's say day 1, day 2, day 10, whatever, then the days that you are getting money early for, right, the interest is borne by the seller, right? So essentially, think of it as, on a normal scenario, the buyer would have paid on day 45, to the seller, right? In this case, buyer sends money on day 45, seller receives money on day 45. If seller wants to receive money early, they will have to bear interest for the time that they are getting money early. If the buyer wants to pay late, typically they have to bear interest for that period.
So the next question is how it will be off balance sheet. It should be
Right.
shown as trade payable or short-term loan.
Right. So basically, this is a factoring transaction, right? Comes under the Factoring Act. As per Factoring Act, this continues to be classified as the trade payable and doesn't come under short-term borrowing, because essentially the financier is now stepping into the shoes of the supplier, right? So that's the most typical, like sort of representation that we have seen. However, a caveat. This is generally best decided with your auditors, right? And their concurrence will be needed on how they look at this transaction. But most of the market, given that this is a factoring transaction, continues to show it as a trade payable.
Next we have is from Sagar Shroff. He's saying we are new to TReDS, how to start.
Right. Sagar, I think happy to maybe chat up one on one. We'll love to understand where you are in the journey. Have you registered? Not registered? Right. I think we'll set up a follow on call after this discussion, and we'll help understand what your exact situation is, and happy to help you out accordingly.
Sharad Tuvani, he has asked the same thing that, how can we partner with CashFlo? So
Yeah,
as
will
Dushyant
be
has
cool.
already answered. Next we have is from Krishna. What factors should we consider when deciding the interest rate?
I think we missed one question, Shariu. I think from Rajan, financing to MSME will be recourse to which party?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the basically, the recourse is on the buyer, right? Because essentially, the buyer had to make payment on a certain due date, right, to the vendor. So now you get the freedom to decide what is that date on which you want to make the payment. But on that date, the buyer needs to honor the payment because that's anyways the nature of the trade, right? So that's how it happens.
Next one is from Krishna. What factors should we consider?
Right. So factors basically are, I think, like I was mentioning, it basically depends on the financials, right? What the financial situation, basis that the interest rate gets decided.
Next one is by Dinesh. Can you please explain how it works off balance sheet
Off balance sheet.
funding?
Yeah, I think I covered that a little bit. Basically, when we say off balance sheet, basically what it means is that it will continue to show as a trade payable and not get classified as a short-term loan. All right. And like I was mentioning, given that it's a factoring transaction, that is the typical treatment that should happen for that, these kind of transactions on the books. Again, caveat, please do consult your auditors, for finalizing on that front.
Next question we have is what will be average interest
NBFC.
NBFC can realize in case of buyer and in case of a seller?
Right. So essentially the way the platform works is that every financier is free to decide their rate, right? So they will take their own call basis the risk assessment on what is the right rate of interest that they want to charge, right? So truly it depends on the risk appetite of the financier, right? I mean, if it's an NBFC, they are free to operate even at 6% per annum, right? There is no regulation or binding around it, right? Or they could charge maybe even 15% per annum. But it truly depends on the risk, appetite and the pricing and the cost of capital for the NBFC.
Next question is from Rajan. How can the buyer know whether the MSME supplier has discounted their bills under the trade financing or not? Shall the buyer receive any mail or message about the same?
Right. So, good question. Essentially, a transaction on TReDS platform cannot happen till a buyer confirms it. So, unless a buyer confirms on the TReDS platform that yes, this invoice is mine, till then the seller can't, transact on the platform. So it can't happen that the seller can go directly to a platform and just discount their invoices, right? First, the buyer needs to get their vendor registered on the platform. The buyer needs to agree that yes, this is my vendor and I'm enabling the platform for them. And then they also need to agree or approve every invoice that is undergoing financing on the platform. Only then the financing can happen.
These are all the questions so far that we have, and we have answered all of them. If you have any more questions, we'll wait for a couple of more minutes, and you can add it in the chat box or the Q&A section. Okay, we have another one. We are providing services to government departments. Then how it works in the system?
Right. So typically, all the government undertakings have already been mandated to be registered on the TReDS platform. So the government department that you're working with should be already on a TReDS platform. What you should do is talk to your SPOC in that department, right, and basically ask them to get yourself registered as a vendor, right, on the TReDS platform that they're working with. Right. And I think once that registration happens, then you can go ahead and avail the facilities of the TReDS platform.
Next question is from Rajiv. What if the buyer doesn't agree to register on TReDS?
Right. So, Rajiv, fair question. Essentially, this has been one of the major, I would say, or one of the key bottlenecks till now on TReDS, that how do you create a win-win ecosystem between the buyers and the sellers so that the buyers also have an incentive of registering on the TReDS platform, right? That's essentially one thing that we as a cash flow platform are trying to solve. Where by enabling a interest subvention for the buyers or a cashback for the buyers, we are incentivizing them that they should register on the platform, right, so that the sellers can also get funds early, as well as the buyers also get advantage in the process. But I think beyond that, anyways, the regulations right now state that if you are 250 crore plus in turnover, you need to register yourself on TReDS, though there is no mandate that um, after registering, the buyers need to onboard their vendors also on the platform, right? So there is a bit of a gray area there. You could register on TReDS, but then you could not register any of your vendors on TReDS. So it doesn't serve the purpose, which is where a commercial workable angle or a viable angle is what we are trying to create between buyers and sellers.
Okay, so the next question we have is, how can cash flow give arbitrage to buyers? Can you give some examples and benefits? Can we make
Right.
money as a buyer?
Right. I think I covered that in a little bit earlier, but would love to sort of, again, I think we can go into more details on that in one-to-one discussion. Whoever is whoever is more interested in understanding that aspect more. I think I alluded to that right during my presentation, that cash flow will enable the buyers to get a cashback or an interest subvention, right, on their DPO extension. It will help vendors get early access to capital, right. Would love to sort of talk about the mechanics more in a one-to-one discussion.
Next question we have is, if the buyer has accepted the invoice,
Right.
but how can the buyer know that the supplier has discounted that particular
Right.
invoice?
There is a notification that will come from the TReDS platform that these invoices are discounted and such is the revised due date on which the buyer needs to make the payment.
Okay. Uh, Next question we have is from Dinesh. MSME vendor registration in any portal, any cost is to be paid by buyer. We are buyer and want to pay the vendor in time.
Right. So generally, the TReDS platforms do have an onboarding cost, right? Because they need to essentially, set up the account, get the limit set up, etc. So there is generally an onboarding cost that is involved in registering on the platform. However, that is something that again can be discussed on a case-to-case basis, depending on what kind of program we are trying to create, right? What's the size of the business, so on and so forth. So it's a commercial discussion. Again, happy to take that up in a one-to-one discussion.
Next we have is from Yuvraj. Can the buyer extend the credit period beyond 45 days where the
Right.
interest is taken care by the seller? Will this be valid under MSME Act?
Right. So basically, the MSME Act essentially talks about the payment to be made to the vendor, right? As long as the payment is made under 45 days to the MSME, the MSMED Act, you are compliant to the MSMED Act, right? How the interest rate is negotiated between the buyer and the seller, it's a commercial term, right? It's basically, it's same as you negotiating a price, with the vendor, right? So from an MSMED Act perspective, as long as the payment is happening less than 45 days, the compliance is there. How the interest component is taken care of, whether it is, that's a commercial discussion between the buyer and the seller. Again, it is something that we help orchestrate between buyers and sellers so that the compliance is there. Yuvraj, happy to talk, again, one-on-one for your specific case, or how can we structure this.
Next one is from Kamal. Being a buyer of MSME suppliers, having turnover more than 250 crores, need to register at TReDS. How can we do this? Is there any intimation required to MSME suppliers after getting registered at TReDS?
Right. So, Kamal, again, happy to, I'll have my team reach out to you offline, help you get registered on the TReDS platforms, right? Once you are done the registration, there is no mandate as of now that you need to intimate the suppliers that they need to be registered. However, it is advised that, you do that registration and so that everyone can basically make use of the facility that is being provided.
Next one is there any processing fee or annual fee involved in this platform?
Right. So typically there is no annual fee. Again, while that's a more commercial discussion, but typically there is no annual fee. There is an onboarding fee that is there, and then on a transaction level, anyways, the charges that are being, the financing cost, right? That essentially is quoted by the financier. That includes a transaction fees for the platform also. All right. So it's a transaction fees and the onboarding fees are typically the two components that come into play.
Next question we have is if total fund ask of all suppliers goes beyond the limit set to the buyer, who will
Right.
decide the selection of invoices out of total ask? If it's up to buyer or TReDS, do it with
Right.
do you do it with any logic?
Right. So typically it's first come first serve. Essentially, if there is a limit that is set up, whoever gets used that uses that limit first, their invoice will get financed. Then gradually, as the limit gets over, then more invoices will not be accepted on the platform unless a certain repayment happens and the limit is open up again. I think we missed a question. So Deepthi is asking. Right. So
Cash flow
CashFlo and
and
M1 Exchange is not same. There are broadly three large TReDS platform today in the market: M1 Exchange, RXIL, and InvoiceSmart. Right. These are the three TReDS platforms who have been licensed by RBI to as a TReDS platform. CashFlo works with all the three TReDS platforms to enable the benefits for buyers and sellers, right? I think I covered that even in the start itself. So essentially, think of us as a layer on top of the TReDS platforms, where we are helping create a more win-win ecosystem for the buyers and sellers rather than a plain vanilla TReDS, right? That's what we're trying to do.
in case of defaults, how to handle it in TReDS?
Right. So essentially, how it happens is, like I was mentioning in the start, it's a factoring transaction, right? So all the rules of the factoring transaction come into play, right? If there's a default, the buyer doesn't pay on the due date, all the provisions which are available in the factoring act for the financier is something that they can leverage, right? So they will reach out to the buyer, right? They can, I mean, essentially go to the court, right? Everything that is as a recourse available to them under the Factoring Act is something that the financiers can make use of in case of defaults.
I don't see any more questions. I think we have covered it all.
Go through if we missed by chance anything. There was a question: NBFCs need to take separate or new approval from RBI. So not anymore. I think last year the government had made it open for any NBFC to be able to join the TReDS platforms. Earlier, only NBFC factors, which was a specific type of NBFC license, were allowed to join. But now any NBFC can join the TReDS platform. Praveen, I don't think we will be in a point of view to say which is the best TReDS platform. I think all three are great. They have their own pros and cons. We work with all three of them, right? I think depending on your sort of, your market, your industry, we may be able to recommend one over the other, right? Again, happy to connect offline on that.
Yes, yes, Sagar, our team will reach out to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have an office in Bangalore, Dinesh.
Yes, we do.
So we have a team that's based out of there. We can reach out to you.
I've also sent our email ID where you can contact us, but we'll make sure that we do contact you guys. But in case if you have any more questions related to TReDS or you would like to know more, please do send your queries at marketing@cashflow.io and we'll surely get back to you. Also, we'll upload this webinar recording on our website and the YouTube channel. You can access this anytime you want, and also the presentation will be shared.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for taking out time and joining us in the morning today. Hope this was helpful. In case you have any more questions, like Sharu mentioned, please feel free to reach out. I think this is a program that needs to be customized for every company as per their supply chain. And that's where we believe in sort of not just giving a cookie cutter approach, right, to everyone, and rather, customizing the program for them, right? So happy to do that one-on-one, for all of you.
Also, I'll be sharing a YouTube channel link so you can check out our other webinar recordings and this particular webinar recording as well. And yes, thank you, Dushyant. Thank you so much for taking out the time and hosting the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on a Wednesday morning. And I have shared the YouTube link. Please check out our other recordings. That will be useful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.